Hey, this is Big J, and you're listening to another episode of Beyond Track Podcast.
Red alert.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond Trek Podcast. I'm Big J with guest host Tay Phoenix, founder of Trek the Vote, connecting American Star Trek fans with nonpartisan groups working to ensure fair and equitable electoral processes. Today, we'll be talking to a very special guest. He has over 180 acting credits, 43 directorial credits, musician, astronomer, and political activist, who you may also know from a little-known role on Star Trek Voyager as Tuvok. Tim Russ, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure being here. Thank you.
So let's get down to the first question that we've got for you. What got you into music and directing? Did this become your preferred creative outlet over acting? And did you have any inspiration from musicians like Louis Armstrong and directors like John Singleton?
In fact, musically, I started playing music when I was 16. I grew up in the Air Force. My father was an Air Force veteran for 20 years. And so we were moving all over the place. And when I went to a new base, which was every 2 years approximately, over time, I had to figure out a way, or wanted to figure out a way to sort of fit in, quickly and easily. And I was always looking for, I loved music and I loved playing. My brother was a drummer at like 14, and he was playing in big orchestras. He was like sitting in with big orchestras on the drums, and he was very good. He still plays today. I started playing guitar when I was 16. Immediately took some lessons, and then put together bands, and was playing in bands almost my whole life, off and on. So that started very early, whereas the directing business came in when I was on the show. I just had an opportunity on Voyager to intern on the show, and anyone who came from that series franchise who wanted to do that had to do the same thing. We all interned basically for 2 to 3 seasons. Everything from observing other directors to coming into production meetings, pre-production meetings, to watching some of the edited screenings with the producers, to also sitting into editing sessions with the editors. And that's what I did for I think it was 2.5 seasons or something like that, before they gave me a shot to direct one of the episodes. And it really helped a lot to get familiar with the process of how to do it, and all the ins and outs, the do's and don'ts, and all that kind of thing. And then beyond there, you're on your own to go off and try to innovate or do things differently for each project.
What was it like growing up on an Air Force base? That was pretty interesting when you mentioned that part.
Yeah, it was, it was difficult because I was very young. So during that time growing up, those are the ages that you're very impressionable, and you're coming into your own as from childhood to an adult. And so there's an impact that moving around like that has on you, because you have to not only move to a new place where you've got to make new friends all over again, and hopefully you'll fit in and be accepted, but also the fact that people would leave, whatever relationships you established, those people would leave all the time, or you would leave all the time. So there was only that, on average, a 2-year sort of span for relationships. And it was really, and you didn't know when that would take place. You could be someplace where you really enjoy it and you're having a good time and you got friends, and you got to leave. And that was not the easiest thing in the world to do for that many years. And I think it shaped my personality as an adult, and it certainly led to me becoming an actor down the line, because there are elements that go with that kind of lifestyle growing up to the same kind of elements that exist doing this kind of business. There is a security issue. There is the unpredictability of what's going around the corner, what's going to happen next. There's working with people very closely and then saying goodbye and not seeing them again. All of those elements come into play, being an Air Force brat, as it were.
Very well said. So I want to talk real quickly about the military desegregation. The time you were there was after that. Did you ever encounter any lingering issues or biases while you were there?
Well, for not so much for myself as for my parents. They did experience some of that stuff. Not and not entirely on the bases. It was more in the locations that we lived in. Sometimes we lived off base. We lived in the suburbs of a city or something like that. We weren't always on an Air Force base. On the Air Force base, not so much. My father rose in the ranks to colonel before he retired. He was relatively successful as an African American in the Air Force. And I don't know that if the pace of his ranking going up was affected by him being African American. If he would have been any faster if he was Caucasian, I don't know. I never actually talked to him about that. But I do know that we experienced in some of the places we lived. Yeah, we experienced that kind of thing. We moved into a neighborhood in Omaha, Nebraska, I remember, and the for sale signs went up because it was not an integrated neighborhood at the time. And people were selling their homes, and we were only going to be there for a couple of years anyway, because my dad was in the Air Force. So, but we did experience that, and there were small moments and things that happened with my parents that were obviously the same way. So, in that respect, no. But my father, in terms of being in the Air Force, he did very well. He became a commander of his unit, eventually overseeing ground communication. So he did very well.
Good. So what got you started into astrophotography?
I was not initially into astrophotography. I was mostly into observable astronomy, which means most of the telescopes I had were designed for observing celestial objects, as opposed to taking pictures and going into all of that business. That's up until recently, that's a fairly expensive and cumbersome endeavor, especially because you have to use a lot of accessories and things, and very expensive telescopes with really fine glass and things like that. What got me into more of that now is the design of the new telescope. The models of telescopes that have come out recently. The one I use is a unistellar EV scope. That did not exist a few years ago. That is a very new technology. And what they've done is they've combined the telescope, which would be an optical telescope. It's a 4-inch mirror. It's not very big, but it's an optical design. They combine that with a sensor, and that sensor can take images and layer them really, really fast. And that's the thing. If you're doing astrophotography in the traditional way, you have to be out there for maybe several hours to get one image. Whereas this telescope will layer them within 1 to 2 minutes. You will be able to have an image that's like what I've posted on social media and things here and there that are just stunning. Plus the fact that is an optical, if you're doing astrophotography traditionally, you have to be out of the city. You have to be in dark skies. You can't do them in the city. This telescope will actually take them in the city. It is really easy to use. There are no accessories. Everything is built in. It's a telescope and a tripod. That's it. It uses a cell phone app. Everything about this telescope is revolutionary technology. And in a way, I must have been waiting for this to happen, because astrophotography has not been one of the things I wanted to pursue. But given the fact that this telescope came along, I was able to not only do some of that, but also naked eye observation through the eyepiece. It has an eyepiece built in, so I can actually see these objects in their entirety, including the color, through the eyepiece in my backyard. I don't even have to go to the dark skies. I do sometimes because I get even a better image out there, but I can do it in my backyard for some of the objects that I'm looking for that I've never seen like that before with an optical telescope. It surpasses all of that.
That is really cool. So what's the most interesting object that you photographed in space?
I would, then I'd say the galaxies to me are the most fascinating, more or less because of what they represent. When you realize what you're looking at, not only how far away they are, but how massive they are and how vast they are, and that they're a galaxy like our own Milky Way. So there's that many more, potential exoplanets and stars in that galaxy, and thus the option or opportunity to consider, intelligent life as well. When you see one of those, you are looking at such a massive collection of stars and planets and the shapes of them as well. To me, are some of the most beautiful objects up there are the galaxies. So those are my favorite to look at.
Have you been keeping up with the James Webb Space Telescope?
Yeah, I actually went to go to see it before it left
Oh,
the facility over here at Northrop Grumman. It was in there being put together. They were actually folding it up, in the process of folding it up, and I talked to the scientists who were working on it. So yeah, they're just now testing it. They're just giving it test runs. They're collecting photons. They're just seeing how it's going to work, and it's in place. I think it was deployed successfully, and that's the biggest thing about that telescope, because if it didn't deploy successfully, they would have nothing, and they would not be able to fix it. So they're very lucky. 20 years plus trying to get that thing together, and what it's going to see and what it's going to give us is the information it's going to give us is going to be amazing, absolutely amazing.
well, I'm sure you're very excited to see what it comes up with. So, I'd like to do this. Let's go a little bit back into the acting career. What do you feel was your breakout role?
Um, I think that when I first started, my biggest break was a feature film called Fire with Fire. It was Craig Sheffer and Virginia Madsen, and that was a feature film role that was done by Paramount. It was Paramount Pictures at the time, and that got the ball rolling for me, because from feature film work. I worked with Walter Hill on Streets of Fire after that. I worked on a couple other projects. Crossroads, I worked with, I can't remember the director's name, but did the film Crossroads. Ralph Macchio was in it. I had to play the blues guitarist Robert Johnson, ironically enough. Those two movies, once I was in them, I got to roll off into television work from there. So I went from feature work to television work. And in the hierarchy of acting, typically the features are at the very top. Then there's television, and then perhaps commercials and soap operas and things like that. It's an unspoken rule or law, as it were. As we say in this business, there are no rules, and they are strictly adhered to. So everything, sort of has a hierarchy in that. It's going to be easier for you to go from features to television than it is to go from television to features. To break features that direction is very hard. So I was able to move quickly into television, which turns out to be more lucrative in the long run. You do a feature film, you get paid for the work that day or that week or whatever it is you're working, and then you have to wait, for the residuals, maybe 2 years, 2.5 to 3 years before the residuals start to roll in from it being played in ancillary markets. Whereas on television, if you do an episodic, very next season, they're repeating the show. And they'll just keep doing it. So, it's more lucrative to work in television. And at the time, there was a lot of television work. There were TV movies, there were movies of the week, all the series and things. A lot of them were shooting here in Los Angeles. So there was a lot of work available. And it just, the film role from Paramount really got the ball rolling. Your agents take what you do, and that's how they pitch you for the next project. And once you've been in a project like that, all of a sudden you are validated, by someone else. So people will look to you as the actor they want to hire. You guys see it all the time. You watch movies, you watch TV show, watch commercials, and you'll see the same face popping up. It keeps popping up. Once somebody's in something, all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, that person was this and that, or they're in a major feature film that's very successful, and then you're going to start seeing them all over the place, because that's what they do.
Now, Fire with Fire was 1 year before Spaceballs.
Yeah.
And going back to the TV part, I know that you've been in a lot of things, probably plenty that we won't get a chance to talk about, but I want to tell you this story. So randomly one night, I am looking at those like 90s television show openers, done the 80s ones with cartoons. So there was a show I used to watch back then called The Highwayman. So I'm looking at the opener, watching it, and a second before I clicked off of it, I see Tim Russ. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I don't remember him being in that. Well, I was real young, so I thought that was great. Where you never know where Tim Russ is going to pop up.
Yeah, Highwayman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Glenn Larson. It's a Glenn Larson project. I think that was the first series that I booked, television series, because before that I was working as a guest star and day player, guest star, that kind of thing. And that was the first series role that I had booked, was the Highwayman. Whirlwind project, that one. Yeah. Yeah, tell you.
Well, so I wanted to ask, are there other unspoken rules as an actor that you feel are notable? And well, I'll let you go answer that part.
Not really any more than that one, because there are that category, you know, under that category, there are several different elements that come into play. You know, as an umbrella, you know, that's an umbrella sort of category, a rule, as it were, because there are other things under that occur. It can happen with casting. It can happen with other things. There are just things that occur in the industry that are not written down. There's no handbook for them. There's no things. They are not spoken, but you know they happen. I'll tell you another one. That's contamination. That's the word that we use. If you work as an actor on a series project for one network, it may be harder for you to get a series role on another network because you have been contaminated. You've already been on a show. So another network going to want a face that they can identify with their own show, not somebody's face that identifies with another show. So that doesn't always, but it can happen. And with Trek in particular, when I got done working on Trek, I didn't want to really work for a little while. I was done. I wanted to take a break, but it was about 2 or 3 years before I could get back in the wheel again, because I had been on Voyager for 7 years. You've been exposed. Your face has been out there. So it's very difficult and tricky to get on another show, because those other producers want faces that are new, for TV especially, that are not identifiable. So when people are watching it, they don't go, "Oh, that's what's his name from Blaggity Blah." They don't want to hear that. You notice commercial actors, once they've done a lot of commercials and they're on a campaign of commercials, and you don't see them on regular TV shows, almost never. If you guys have been watching, you don't see what's her name, Flo from Progressive. You don't see her on movies and TV shows doing guest star leads or anything like that, because she's so identifiable as Flo. That's the unspoken rule. They could just as well. She's extremely talented. They could put her on any comedy, but because she's, you know, she's on that commercial all the time, it's very hard for people always going to see her as that and not as this other character that they want to bring to life on their own personal projects. So there's just a few things that fall under the umbrella of rules that exist that are not spoken.
Do you, as a follow-up, I just wanted to ask, do you feel that there are unwritten or unspoken rules that are specific to being a person of color, or very specifically to being a Black actor, that you have noticed?
Not so much. In fact, right now, it's almost a revolution, and we've seen it. When I was growing up, there were no commercials with interracial couples. Not happening. Nobody was going to put a nationwide a product on a commercial with interracial couples. Now you see them. You see gay couples, you see interracial couples. You guys have seen them a lot, not just a few, a lot. Television shows, interracial couples, gay themes on television shows. There's been a lot of African-American roles are now running non-traditional, mostly because of Hamilton, I believe is the impetus for that. But you see a lot of shows where they're casting projects that take place in medieval times, and they're casting African-Americans, Victorian times, African-Americans in lead roles. You never would have seen these characters in there before. Right now, it is ramped, I'd say 30-40% in favor of African-Americans being cast leads, full-on cast, full-on series. When I was again started in the business, there were only a couple of comedies with full-on Black casts. They weren't casting dramas. They certainly weren't casting romantic Black actors, lead male Black actors in anything. Only a couple of actors now and then would step out, Denzel and a few others, but otherwise you didn't see them. They didn't put Blacks in those types of roles, you know, for obvious historical reasons. So now you see it a lot more. You see full-on casts. They just did Wonder Years, and now they have a Black actor playing the lead role in Wonder Years. They've rebooted the whole thing with a Black lead actor. They've done that on a couple of other shows as well. It is changing right now as we speak. And I am absolutely thrilled to see it. I think it's great. And they could, in my opinion, diversify those casts even more, with other ethnicities as well. You see a lot more East Indian actors. You've noticed that over the last, 10, 12 years? Now you have a lot more East Indian actors making the inroads into all these different projects. It's happening. It's happening.
You mentioned earlier about that look that networks want to distinguish with their show so that the audience isn't relating that to another show you're on. And you brought up something that I thought was interesting that relates to that. I don't recall if it was Spencer for Hire or A Man Called Hawk that Avery Brooks was in, the bald look, goatee. He got on DS9 and they wanted him to have hair and to shave that because they did not want to associate him as an actor to that show, but also he looked too urban.
Right.
Now, is that something that you've seen or come across as well, that you get cast in a show or in a role and they want you to be less black?
No, I mean, I haven't run into that. And again, under the unspoken rule umbrella, something like that could happen and I would not know about it, because I might read for a role and they might say, well, he looks to this or to that. And I would never know. They're not going to tell your agent anything about that, if that's their decision. It could be one person in the room, or two in the room that say, oh, no, he looks to this or looks to that. And typically, if I read for something, I can tell by the part, if I am going to look right for that role or not physically, just by the description of the role. If it's a character that grew up in the street or in the hood or that's rough around the edges, or he's a bad guy, yeah, okay, well, that look will work fine. If it's somebody who's sophisticated, who's metro, who's a lawyer, doctor, something like that, yeah, then I might not, if I look a certain way, I may or may not have a shot at that role at that time. So that's the way I look. I did, after Voyager, I shaved my head pretty much and had a goatee, so I didn't, I worked on some gigs based on that look. But there were probably other roles that I didn't get because at the time I had that look. And just to go back to what Dave was talking about earlier, that's the acting aspect in terms of African Americans is not, you don't run into the discriminatory element of that. In the broader sense, you don't really run into that kind of thing. Where you run into it is in the directing and in the producing and in the decision making. Those are the areas where minorities are still not integrated that much at all. Very few African American directors. Women coming along. There are more women directing now than there were when I started out 12, even 15 years ago. Quite a few more now, but they had to make inroads as well. It's those parts, those are the gigs that are the hardest for minorities to get into, above the line, directing and then producing and things like that, and even into the network, into the decision making, the green lighting of projects. There's not, except for Oprah or Tyler Perry, you can count them on one hand, that have the power to green light a project. Spike is going to be able to do it. Jordan Peele. They make a breakthrough because they make a project that gets a lot of critical acclaim and makes a lot of money. As soon as you do something like that, yeah, you've got the door open, but you've got to kick that door open. You're not going to easily get the opportunity to get behind the camera if you are a minority. That still exists today, and you're not going to have the ability to climb, up the ladder in terms of the studio system if you're a minority for making into the management and decision making of the actual companies, whether it's Netflix or Amazon or anything like that. There's no African Americans at the top of those companies making those decisions. That ceiling is still there, very much. Yes, Dave.
So I want to go back to this question of the look for a moment.
Sure.
One of the things that I've learned recently is that Jerry Taylor and Rick Berman and Michael Piller conceived of the Kazon very early on, right, as a metaphor for gang rivalries in LA.
Yeah.
And they were portrayed by many white actors who used makeup to darken their skin. They gave them textured hair. I was wondering if you had feelings about that at the time, or if in retrospect, what you think of that.
No, not really, because, Trek has always been a vehicle for more or less based on what Gene was looking forward to, was conceptually working out our differences as humans between each other, using humans and aliens as foils to carry out these storylines, to deal with and wrestle with all the different sort of cultural issues we have with each other, and how we communicate with each other, how we get along with each other, how we work out our differences with each other. That's what I mean. And the Kazon, at the time, my only gripe was, that the characters were looking for water, and I was like, they're spacefaring. How in the world would they not be able to find water? That was my issue.
I never thought of that.
Yes, exactly.
Until now. Wow.
Yeah, it's my pet peeve with generally any sci-fi movie, and even generally with a drama, that you got to close the holes, man. If you're going to come up with a concept, you got to make sure the holes are closed. So that was a little strange, because you're spacefaring. They were using more than impulse power to get around, and if you're going to do that, you probably figured out the water problem.
You just ruined the first couple seasons of Voyager for me. Unwatchable.
The most prominent element in space is hydrogen. The universe is full of hydrogen, and that's the main element of water. So you'd be able to pull that out anywhere you go in the universe. So that would not be a problem. But the issue of the way they looked and what their whole thing was, that did not bother me at all at the time. They were one of hundreds of alien races that they put together for a storyline, and those guys are about writing stories. That's all they want to do, is write and tell stories. So, it didn't bother me. I mean, here I was, the first African-American Vulcan on the show, for God's sake. So that's saying something. And surprisingly enough, even some Trek fans found it difficult to believe that there would be an African-American Vulcan. I usually had to put them straight on all of that,
And the first full-blooded Vulcan lead.
And first full-blooded Vulcan lead. Yep. Yeah. So they, we're stretching out. They stretched out with the first female captain. So, that did not bother me in the least. Like I said, my only issue was the storyline that they gave me.
Oh, that's excellent. So, Tim, being a Black father, we talk about that for a little bit. Being a Black father can be its own unique experience, and it can be different from others in many ways. I can tell you that as a Black father. What does being a Black father in today's America mean to you?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstance of being a father. What the relationship is that you have with a child's mother, and whether your child is a male or female. I think if you're raising a son, there's going to be some issues with that potentially down the line. We know, based on what's happened recently with the police shootings and things like this, that I would be concerned about that. I might be concerned about, based on what part of the country you live in, if he would be, jogging through a neighborhood and accosted by three guys in a pickup truck, and killed. I would have issues and have concerns about something like that if I was raising a son right now in this day and age, and living in certain places. Here in Los Angeles, not an issue. I don't have to worry about that. I have a daughter. I don't have a son, so I'm not worried about, her being shot and killed, because of a traffic stop or something like that. So I think it would depend on whether you had a boy or girl, and also what part of the country you lived in. I think it would have an impact. Otherwise, for myself, it has not been an issue. My daughter is mixed. Her mother is Caucasian. She's British. And the only thing I run into generally for that is that if she has worked in the business as well. So it's difficult for her to get, I think in some cases, to get some roles, because she's ethnically ambiguous, but she skews a little lighter skin rather than darker skin. So they will tend to, if they're looking for somebody who's mixed race, they might go with somebody who's a little bit darker rather than lighter skin, just because it pops on the screen a lot quicker and easier. And so she's, I think, run into that every once in a while, that she might look too close to somebody Caucasian. So, you know, but as far as fatherhood goes, for me, it's easy. There's not a problem. It's not an issue. Again, I can only speculate, you know, what other African-American fathers might be feeling out there with sons living in other states, where these issues with the police and or random attacks might be the case, because all of that is on the rise, as we well know. The police shootings have been on the rise, and also the attacks on minorities, from African Americans to Chinese, are on the rise, simply because our politics have changed, and culture wars have been, you know, brought to the forefront.
So, and I've had the same discussion with my older son. He's mixed, and I've told him, you really have to be paying attention to what's going on these days and how things are happening.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to get by just a little easier because you've got that mixed complexion. You're not going to pop right out. My daughter, she's a little bossy one, let me tell you, but I want to ask you something. How do you handle a mixed girl's hair? It's killing me. It's just like its own entity. Have you, as a father with a mixed girl, is the hair also a challenge for you as well?
It was when she was younger. Yes, absolute nightmare. 100% nightmare. It was a tangled mess of, it was impossible, and it was really difficult, and she was always miserable when we had to deal with it. Now she deals with it on her own. She's got all the tools and things that she needs to make it happen. So at one point she wore it straight. She got it all straightened out, and it was a lot easier then, but it causes a lot of damage to the hair. So she stopped doing it. Now she's got it back to the way it was originally, and she wrestles with it and deals with it on her own. She's 22, so it's all her now. I don't have to deal with it.
Right.
But yeah, we had oh boy, growing up. Yeah, that was not pretty. Not at all. And it's just genetics. It's the way it goes, you know. Yeah.
And she's 7, so, and I got fired from doing her hair by her.
Oh yeah. Well, I've been there, man. I was there. Believe me, I was there. I can hear you. I feel your pain.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
No
now
worries.
I feel like we've really got the connection there.
Oh
with
yeah.
The hell of the mixed girl's hair, which I asked her earlier today, you know, because I have no hair of my own, and I asked her. I said, "Hey, can I have a little bit of your hair?" She said, "No." I said, "But I want some of your hair. I'm gonna look good." She said, "Well, Daddy, even though you're bald, I think you're still handsome." I wasn't sure if there was an insult in there somewhere, real subtle. Yeah. She's good at that.
Mixed references, yes, of course. Mixed innuendo. Yeah, there you go.
So here's another thing I've got for you. You mentioned the importance of directing for diversity.
Yeah.
So when you directed, did you find that there were an uneven treatment or distribution of that? Were you more challenged as a director just because you were Black? Did you get this feeling that you weren't being treated the same as a non-Black actor, or maybe not as trusted?
Oh no. In fact, no. The projects that I worked on, that has not risen as an issue. When I directed Star Trek, the episode, there was none of that either. As a matter of fact, the executive producers didn't even come to the set the first day that I was working. They never visited the set to look over my shoulder to see what I was doing, to watch what's happening. They didn't even come there. They were busy working, and they trusted that I could get the job done, and that was it. I think subsequently, I think I was trying to get a second slot before that show went off the air, and it was sort of near the last couple of years. So it was tricky to get another slot. And I think that the supervising producer at the time, I didn't get along with as well. She was kind of uptight and had an attitude about things sometimes. So I don't, some of us didn't get along with her that well, and I think that might have affected my ability to get a second slot before the show went off the air. And that may have been more political than anything else. But that project, since that project, I have not noticed that there would be any lack of respect for what I was able to do. Because in all the projects that I worked on, I brought those projects in under budget and on time, and the producers were happy with the results. So for the most part, once you're on there and you know what you're doing, and it's obvious that you know what you're doing, to everybody, they're going to know in the first hour of what's happening. They're going to know by the first rehearsal of a scene. And the DP is going to know just by what you want to do for the shots. And when you're calling those shots, they're going to know if you know what you're doing or not. And that's going to be more critical than whether I was African-American or not. Is when you're on set, they're going to know if you know what you're doing. If you're wavering, if you're wishy-washy, if you're changing your mind back and forth all the time, you can't make up your mind, or you forgot to do this or forgot to do that, they're going to know very quickly. And that's going to be more detrimental to you trying to get the job done than anything else. The hardest part, again, is now just trying to get the slot to do the project. And what I've done mostly is feature films, pilot presentations, feature films, independent films since leaving Voyager. And so the issue I run into with that is not, whether or not somebody is interested in having you shoot their project. The problem is whether or not their project actually goes anywhere, or actually takes off, or they get funded, or they don't get funded. And that's usually what the case is. So for myself, I'm developing my own scripts and my own projects now with several different producers. So, and that's the direction that I want to go from this point forward. I'm more interested in being on the ground floor on the foundation of these projects, and starting them and working on it and developing them, and then getting them off onto the road, and hopefully being behind camera on them as well. I don't really enjoy the producing aspect of projects. I don't really like producing. It's a lot of paperwork and whatever. It's really not my interest. My interest is shooting. So story and directing are the things that I want to get behind people on, and my own projects on at this point forward. And then I would have, in those situations, I would be coming in at that level where people expect you to know what you're doing, and would give you that respect. You don't have to beg for it or whatever. So.
I do want to ask you more about your projects before we get too far ahead, your projects and scripts. But I'm curious, what were the differences you experienced from being in sci-fi television or movies, as opposed to a production geared more towards the younger audience, like iCarly?
Oh, well, the iCarly came about 3 years after I finished working on Voyager. It was 3 or 4 years later that I ended up booking iCarly, and subsequently working with on a show called Samantha Who with Christina Applegate, which was also a comedy. So I did both those projects. I was doing them at the same time, and it kind of is, if you will, pardon the word, a logical sort of transition. I went from doing this heavy space drama to doing comedy, and again, it took 4 or 5 years for that to happen, because coming off the project, the unspoken rule, as we mentioned earlier, is recreating yourself. You have to recreate yourself. You step back and let people forget what you did, let them forget what's going on, and all the new projects come in. You come back out and step out in a different role, i.e. iCarly or Samantha Who. Now you're a different character, and they've forgotten about Voyager. It didn't happen right after I got off the show. It took 4 or 5 years of not working that much at all until those breaks came into being. And that's how this business works. And you've seen it before. You've seen actors disappear, and then all of a sudden they come back. John Travolta is a perfect example. Yeah, he disappeared, and then Pulp Fiction, bang, he's all back like, on like gangbusters. So all of these things, these occur. That, again, it's the unspoken rule, and it's just, the way that the ebb and flow of this business works. So doing the comedy was not I'd done comedies before I had done Voyager, so I'd already had experience doing sitcoms, and it was just a matter of taking that role and playing it. I mean, he's a principal and he's on the right age, and it worked out that Schneider liked the work that I did, and it just happened. You know, I went in and read for it, they liked it, and the same for Samantha Who. Yes, Tay.
I wanted to ask you, so obviously you're working on stories, and I don't want to pressure you to put out any details you don't want to, but I'm fascinated that you're working on scripts. Is there anything that you could share with us?
Well, I can tell you that one of the projects I'm working on with a producer named John Mocht is a big sci-fi action adventure. It takes place in a star system that we are familiar with in terms of actual astronomy, called Proxima 7, and we are putting that project together. It's a science fiction sort of, I want to say, labor and management sort of type of storyline. So it's very interesting the way it is. It's a big action adventure sci-fi, and that's something that he is very much interested in doing. So we put the story together, and right now we're working on all of the storyboards for it, which would be all the special effects, samples, all the ships, all the things like that, the tech that's going to be in it, and the characters. So we're putting that together now. I'm working on a biopic that takes place in the early 1900s, which is features a lead male African-American character who was an actual hero, an actual character that existed at that time, and all of the journey that he had in his life. And it's an absolutely unbelievable journey. You could not just make it up. If you read his story is phenomenal. So it writes itself. And I've just finished the script. The third draft of that script is just completed about a month ago. So I'm now trying to get that marketed, get some people in their hands, and to see if they're interested in that. And there's a supernatural thriller that I'm working on with someone that they want to shoot sometime later this year. Supernatural drama thriller, and also an African-American producer wants to do a show called Tops, which is a feel-good inner city, New York City, Harlem sort of feel-good film. It's a really cute story about a neighborhood and a character who's one of the characters who's threatening to gentrify some of the elements of this neighborhood and the people who are resisting that. And it's a cute story. It's got to do with a street game that people play, the kids play at that time. So it's very cool. So there's about 4 projects that I'm working on with different producers to try to get on the road. And once they take off in development, then I would have those. They would be posted on IMDb, and you'd be able to see, some of the artwork and some of the other things that are going on.
So as a fellow musician and also a storyteller, one of the things that I have found is that my understanding of music and the way that music can flow through a piece has really helped me understand narrative. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if that shows up for you, and if so, how?
If it shows up for me in what?
In either as a director, as a writer, is there understanding the way that music can move through a story or help move a story?
Absolutely.
Is it something that you? Yeah. I'd love to hear more about that.
Absolutely critical. And also, I want to say it's a form of magic. It's a form of alchemy, if you will, which baffles me even today, because you take the writer writes the script, and then you have the director and the actors take that script and put that on the screen. They take the words off the page and make an image out of it, and then you hand it to the editor, who's going to cut the story together, and they're going to have their sort of input because they're objective. And then you're going to have the composer take all of that once you've cut it together, and then put a score on it, and that has to come out of nowhere. Now you can give the composer, here. I'd like this to have a folkish sort of feel. I'd like it to be. I'd like it to have a Celtic folk feel. I'd like it to have a country folk feel. I'd like it to have an R&B sort of groove. I'd like it to be more what I've used in the past as what I prefer in some cases, atmosphere, not necessarily music, but atmosphere. I'd like a pulse over here. I'd like this to be nothing here. I'd like this to be completely empty. You can go over and spot the whole project once it's done with the composer and have put it together, but I'll tell you, You know, a lot of times if projects I've worked on before, I said I'd like a theme. I'd like a recurring theme. And we know E.T. has a recurring theme. The Raiders of the Lost Ark has a recurring theme. That melody, that theme, that's going to recur. That hook, I'd like that. That's got to come out of nowhere. I can't ask and describe what that's going to sound like. That's just got to come out of the writer's imagination and talent to make this piece, to bring this piece to life. You know, that moment when the character breaks out and does this thing, that the climax that occurs, the decision that this character makes, the journey that they make, the montage that we have to roll with, all that stuff has got to come from the writer. And let me tell you, that is a hell of a process, because you have to rely on the composer to come up with that. You have to rely on them to come up with that. You can only give them maybe some guidelines, you know, but they have to look at the film and feel what that's going to be. And boy, I've seen a lot of work that's just done very, very, very well. Very rarely do you get one that just, you know, when you listen to it and man, you're just thinking, man, where did they get that music from? Or why did they choose that track for that bit? You know, even if it's transition from one scene to another. I wonder why they chose that piece of music. And did it work? You've heard pop stuff before. What was it? One, is it Soho? What's the movie that Netflix, Soho, One Night in Soho? What's that one? It's out right now.
Oh, I'm blanking on it.
It has that movie.
I'll look that one up.
Yeah,
Okay.
Soho. Matt Smith is in it from Doctor Who. That movie has a lot of tracks in it, songs that are kind of different, each one, and they slot them in there, and it's very interesting because when you hear them at first, you might think, "Wow, does that right? Does that fit?" And then you think after a few bars, "Oh yeah, that's really cool. Oh yeah, that works." Where they just slot in this track, and this track is a song. It's not orchestral score. It's a song. It's a tune. It's a music piece. I didn't even know if they were, you know, pre-recorded, if they were songs from the past, or if they were already pop songs, or if they were originally written for the movie. But you know, they was interesting the way they slot them in. That for the music supervision, the person who's doing all the music supervising and things like that, and the director is going to decide, well, they like this track or that track for this thing, as opposed to the score. The score is a composer sitting there, man, and putting in the strings and putting in the synth or putting in the whatever it might be under the scene and bringing it in right at the moment where the character has to make a decision or there's something happens to the character or whatever. And that is just pure magic. There's something about that it's alchemy. That's all I can explain it. You have these incredible talents all coming together, you know, that are these rare elements in and of themselves, like silver and gold and copper, to try to make gold, to try to make diamonds, try to make, you know, something that's just this pure thing from all these different inputs and all these different creative talents. It's remarkable to me that any of this stuff ever gets done at all. It really is.
That was Last Night in Soho.
Last Night in Soho, there it is. I believe that's the one we just saw recently. I watched recently. Very good movie. And I thought it was interesting. I think they had some very interesting music stuff in there. And like I said, once in a while, I've heard some things. Blade Runner, the new Blade Runner that was out, the more recent one, had some very strange orchestral things going on there. That score, you know, that just it seemed out of place to me. I don't know. I was just watching the movie, and all of a sudden, this giant, huge sound comes on out of the speakers, and the character's just walking across just walking across a field or something. There was nothing happening, but the score sound, it was so big and so grand, but it was nothing on the screen that was grand. So it was very weird to me, and it stuck out when I watched it. I remember it stuck out. I remember it right now, in fact, which tells you that it stuck out. So
Hans Zimmer was the composer on that one.
And I like Hans Zimmer's work. I've liked his work in the past, but if you saw that movie, there's a couple of places where the lead character is walking, I don't know, he's walking across that area with all those giant statue heads, and I don't know why the sound was so big. It was just, and he did it a couple of times in the movie where there was nothing happening on the screen that was that big. It was very, very strange. It was very weird. So I don't know. I can figure all that out.
I wanted to ask you too. So we were able to find a small snippet of a production of Dreamgirls that you were
Yes,
in.
yes.
And I also, we saw that you did on NCIS New Orleans. They had you come in and play music there.
Oh, yes.
And I was wondering, so you've done these pieces of musical theater, of music in television.
Right.
Is there a dream project for you that you, in terms of combining your musicianship and your work in film and television?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to work on a musical film, a musical story. I would love to do one of those, even if it's on stage. I would enjoy that just as well. As an actor, I've always wanted to do a musical. I've done a couple of them in the past, but I've always enjoyed the platform. I've always enjoyed the sound and the style of those. Um, if it's a piece that involves musicians, involves music as a feature film story, I would enjoy that very much. And one of my favorite roles in recent years has been the NCIS episode, because we shot that live. That was not played back to sync. And that's why when I was cast in the role, I had to play guitar. I had to record myself playing and singing blues in order for them to hire me. I recorded the stuff, sent them the tape, and I went to New Orleans. I worked with New Orleans musicians in the studio for 7 hours the day I got there, or the next day I got there. We worked on all the songs. We did record the tracks because there were other shots in the story where the music had to be in the background. So we recorded all that stuff, and then we went on the set and actually played in that club. Played all those tracks 2 or 3 times live, and they ended up using them. And that was pretty amazing, because that normally doesn't happen. Normally they just shoot to playback. That's the easiest way to do all that. And the director didn't want to do it. The producer wanted to do a live thing. So that is why I still play music. It's why I continue to play guitars, why I continue to stay active in music, because those moments can arise, and it's like it can happen in the next 10 seconds that an opportunity like that rolls by and you're able to step up and do it. If I hadn't been playing guitar for all those years, I hadn't been up to my game and on par with it, I wouldn't have been able to book the role. And that's work. And it's very enjoyable work. So yeah, it definitely, I would enjoy doing a project that was music based. Almost did one a couple of years ago with a guy that was doing an independent science fiction musical that he put together, this huge monstrosity of a project. And I had to sing a couple of the tracks, did the vocals for a couple of the tracks. He did some of the music for them, and he was trying to get it together. It never got off the ground, but that's what he wanted to do, and that's what he was working on. So yeah, at some point in time, it'd be great.
In 1997, you directed an episode of Voyager whose central theme was about how historical revisionism could perpetuate false narratives.
Right.
It's now a new phenomenon, but we're seeing a lot of that happening now in some segments of politics in the media. How do you think this era is going to be remembered in a few decades?
Wow, how is this era going to be remembered? Well, that's a good question. Let's see. Well, I would hope that this era would be remembered in history class, political science classes, and things like that as a lesson for how tenuous our democracy is. I was very lucky to draw that story, because I could have gotten a dog for the story. I could have gotten something that was not that interesting. I was very lucky to draw that story. I had no choice in it. They just give you what it is. And I was very lucky to have it, because I love history. I'm a history buff. And I think it's so important to learn from history. And the story being that story that I directed was about revisionist history. It's about the perception of what might have happened a long time ago, affecting how the cultural relationships exist today. And what we have now, and what's happening now, is a result of what has happened in the past in our own history. Our country is very, very, very unique. We in a relatively modern age of civilization, we had slavery for centuries, and whereas most other countries did not have it for that period of time. So it's a very fascinating thing that this upheaval of the social and cultural sort of norms that we've been dealing with have come to pass as they are. As I was growing up, we had a very difficult time in the 60s and 70s. I lived through the times of civil rights and also the Vietnam War. And it was just this outcry against the Vietnam War. And that was a policy. It wasn't a culture war, it was a policy. And so you had both sides. What we have today is this, our democracy is under threat because we don't communicate on the same level of reality. We don't communicate with the same facts. We believe, one side believes in alternative facts and the other side believes in reality. And this has never happened in a modern society that I can recall. I mean, yes, there's state-run media like Russia's had, and China, Korea, and Hitler, and the Germans. They had state-run media where they just put out their version of what was happening, and you either went along with it or you didn't. But that was not a democracy. Within a democracy, there's always been debate over issues, but based on a common ground of facts and reality, and we don't have that now. So this time is absolutely one of the most pivotal points in our history that we are living through right now. All of us are living through this point in history that could threaten the very foundation of the entire country, and the lives of everybody in it, simply because of the spreading of disinformation and the denial of facts and the denial of reality. And man, that is a tough nut to crack. Imagine yourself writing the Constitution for a country as to how a country will be governed that has to apply to 270 years from now. Imagine sitting down and trying to write that document right now, and it has to apply 270 years from now. That's what our founding fathers did. Oh yeah, they could imagine the way we live today and all the changes in our culture and society. They did built into the Constitution, they built in the malleable elements of it. They built in the flexibility, they built in the fact that it can morph and adapt to the changes in the culture, which they could never have foreseen how dramatic the changes are. But they did, and it works. It still works today. In most of the developed nations, they still work today, in the democracies. So what we have is the major, major challenge to that very core concept, to deny the reality, to deny the actual facts and information. There is no discussion, there is no debate, there is no anything to do with an issue if the two sides cannot agree on a common set of facts. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know how you can counter that. I just don't know how. The only way I can see it is if people become more aware, of what's going on. And the more aware of what's going on and aware of what the facts and the truth are, that crowd, that group of people can stave off this sort of cancer that's taking over. It's a cancer and it's spreading. So I'm hoping that first of all, we have to get over this hurdle and sort of get the country back on track. And in the future, I'm hoping that they look back on this moment in time and ask all the pertinent questions and wonder why we did what we did, and ask how did that happen, and perhaps not make that mistake again. And we've only got a year or two before we are challenged with making that mistake again. Handing the keys over to entities that want to drive the car back into the ditch. So very, very difficult time that we are going through, man. I mean, you guys are aware that I post stuff all the time, and it is very important to me. I've been around for long enough, and I have a point of reference. I've seen the country tear itself apart before, and obviously for different reasons. This reason is profoundly different than what I grew up with. As bad as it was back then, it changed the course of the Southern Democrats, for God's sakes. The South was all Democratic prior to the civil rights and the Vietnam War riots. They flipped after that because they were so outraged at what they saw happening. The people were, revolting against the government because of the war, and questioning the government and being angry, and they've completely flipped, and now it's all Southern Republicans, and they're extraordinarily to the right. It happened because of the incidents that occurred at that time, and now we have the advent of disinformation, the advent of outlets like Fox News and the rest of the right-wing media that does nothing but chant and preach disinformation, misinformation, culture wars, things that don't even exist, man. And they follow the doctrine of Hitler's propaganda minister, Goebbels, the rest. It's right down there, but just keep saying it, and eventually people will believe it. And that's where we are now. So I got to tell you, that's I hope we can get to a future where we can actually, that we actually have that, that there's somebody can look back and say, hey, wow, what happened to that point in time? I hope we have that. I really do.
I want to ask you, so you and I could geek out about politics all day because
Yes.
you know where I'm coming from. But I want to go back. So you mentioned earlier about the culture war.
Yeah.
And at least in my view, it feels like the backlash to that is the New Southern strategy, right? They are coming back at this, trying to wedge people apart based on the level of discomfort that some white people have with the conversation about what direction this country needs to go in.
Sure.
And I want to find out from you, what do you see as the role of storytellers, musicians, writers, actors, and like you said, getting us over that hurdle and getting the country back on track? How do we as storytellers make a difference?
Oh, a huge difference. In the past, the artists, and we're all in the field of art, whether it's music or whether it's film, television, or plays. The debate has always been whether entertainment and art reflect what is happening in society or whether we project what could happen in society. And I think that both of those things apply. We as writers and artists, and we are seeing it now. Again, I mentioned earlier, we're seeing, based on what's happening politically, is very different than what we see on television. We can turn the television on and we see how it's changed. We see minorities in these key roles and projects and stories and commercials, interracial marriages and couples, and the gay theme it was never talked about when I was growing up, and now it's everywhere. The artists, our responsibility and our job and our contribution to this is that we keep producing, we keep showing the images, we keep putting those out there, because the younger people are going to see those as normal. That will be their point of reference. They don't have a point of reference from 25, 35, 40 years ago. They have a point of reference from today. So what they see in the media, what they see in the video games, what they see on the television commercials and the TV shows and the movies that they are all watching and they're all streaming, that's the stuff that generation, my daughter and her kid, growing up with a point of reference that's now. So if that's coming on and they're being able to see it, that is going to make the difference. That's going to make the difference. It is very important that we, as artists, whenever we get a chance to, if we have the opportunity to make a point of questioning that, pointing that out, and wrestling with that, very much. We are not only reflecting what's happening, we are talking about what needs to happen. And so that is our responsibility. It has always been our responsibility. If you watch movies and television shows from the past, all the way from the 50s, 60s, 70s, we wrestled with all kinds of issues. Back then, when I was growing up, it was nuclear war. A lot of stories about nuclear war, because the threat of nuclear war was so palpable. It was so real. It almost happened. So there was movies and things, Strangelove, Failsafe. There was about a project that were done that dealt with nuclear war. We are seeing now, what are we seeing now? A lot of shows about post-apocalypse, dystopia. How many shows about that? How many movies where everything is completely destroyed? It's projecting what could possibly happen if we keep on the path that we might be. Could this come to those kinds of blows, internationally or domestically? We see these changes. And our film and television has changed and tracked with what has happened, and the tensions and the pressures in our society. The pandemic brings upon these, this whole shutdown of our whole world over a pandemic brings on all these dystopia stories and these virus stories, and all that stuff reflects what's happening. So yeah, as artists, that's our job and our duty. I'm running out of time, guys. I have to get going here. I have to get rolling.
Tim, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Tay, thank you for helping me out as well and co-hosting this with me. All right. Well, thank you for going boldly with Beyond Trek podcast.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Tay, and enjoy your music very much. Keep playing, love.
Oh, thank you. That's thank you.
Take care, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You take care.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our Patreon and Anchor supporters. Big thanks to Stephanie Baker, S. Tam, Anne Marie, Jim Cook, and Nora Hickson. We really appreciate your support. Thanks for being a part of Beyond Trek Podcast.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your years. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.
Well, thank you very much for spending the time with us. We really, really appreciate it. That was great of you. There is one thing that I would like to show you, and this is, I think you're going to like this. This is something that I made, let's see, it's probably about a year or so ago, and it's a GIF. So here, let me put it in the Zoom chat. All right, you got the Zoom chat there. Okay, go ahead and check that out.
All right. Let me see here. Okay, there it is. Uh-oh. Boy, I'll tell you, I never would have imagined that 4 words would go on for such a long time in the pop culture of the country. It's stunning. It's never ended, and it's still there.
I got a lot of compliments for that GIF, so